My green? Listen, pre-starting this, if you're standing in between these two here, it's a little wild ride up here. Hey, welcome to Current Church. It is so great to see you guys all today. And my name is Ryan James. I'm the groups director here at Current Church. And we have a great service lined up for you guys today. I am ecstatic to be here today. And last week, if you guys were here, we were actually starting a new series last week called What Happy Couples Know. And the funny thing is, last week, Ben left us on a cliffhanger, right? So if you were here last week, you would hear that he said, he preached a wonderful message and we listened to it. But at the very end, he says, I'm going to give you the answer next week. Do you guys like cliffhangers? Do we really like cliffhangers? Well, hey, there's actually something we can do to help with the cliffhanger here at Current Church. If you go to mycurrent.church on YouTube, we actually archive all of these messages. So just like on Netflix or Hulu or Disney Plus or whichever, it's not cable anymore. We learned that a few weeks ago. But whatever it is, you can actually go and binge all of our previous services. We have them all on there. We're starting to break them up into playlists. So if that's something you would like to do to get caught up, and if you want to even get caught up from last week, I encourage it because this message is great. Hey, we are going through a new series, like I mentioned, of What Happy Couples Know this month, right? So I would like to show some great pictures of weddings, of what happy couples might know. So let's look at this picture up here. Yeah. Doesn't that look like a happy couple right there? I don't know. You can't tell quite by it. I don't know if this might be, my guess is this is the father walking his daughter down and the wind kind of took control. Maybe that is a win for the day, but that really, something's sweeping her off her feet right there, but I'm not quite for sure. But let's look at something a little more familiar. Look at this couple. Do you guys recognize who that is? That's Ben and Amy. Those are our pastors here. And my question is, what do you think's going through his head right there? What do you guys think? Speaking of heads, do you see the head on the far right there? I can't quite make out who that is, but it looks familiar, and it kind of looks like this head that we know. So that is our patriarch over here. So I want to show you a picture from my wedding. So me and my wife are celebrating 16 years this year in June. And I want to show you a picture from our wedding. This is me and my grandpa. And I miss my grandpa dearly. If you know me at all, you know that I'm a jokester. Well, all of my jokes I got from my grandpa. He told so many jokes. In fact, this is one of my favorite pictures ever because I know exactly what he whispered in my ear that day after our wedding was over. And just kind of set it up here a little bit. Rachel, my wife and I, we abstained and we were virgins when we got married. And so you might be picking up where this is going. He whispered in my ear, if you have any questions about tonight, don't forget to give me a call. So that was my grandpa, and we then laughed just like you're laughing right now. So I mentioned my wife and I, we're going on 16 years of marriage, and some things change over the years. It's not always the same 16 years ago, but one thing that never changes is the way my wife looks at me. I see that look almost every single day. In fact, that look was whenever she put my ring on my finger. The ring was really tight, and she was really worried that day that my ring wasn't going to fit my finger. So hey, we have a wonderful service lined up today. We're going to be talking more about what happy couples know. We're going to get into that message more. But if you guys will, go and stand up. But first, we're going to sing a few songs together today. And as you're standing up, I want to encourage you guys to sing with us. Look to your neighbor and just say, good to see you this morning.
said my future's full of your hope. You've never failed, so I know that you'll never fail me. You said your love would never give up. You said your grace is always enough. You said your heart would never forget or forsake me. You said I'm safe, you call me yours. You said my future's full of your hope. You've never failed, so I know that you'll never fail me. I'll take you at your word. You said it, I'll believe it. I've seen how good it works. You started, you'll complete it. I'll take you at your word. You said it, I'll believe it. I've seen how good it works. You started, you'll complete it. I'll take you at your word. You're good on your promise. You're good on your promise. God, you're good on your promise. It's so clear throughout the scripture that God keeps his word to us. He promises not that life will be easy, but that in the midst of the difficult, he's right there with us. I want to read you something that the Apostle Paul wrote to the church in Corinthians. He says this, all of this, Paul's life being in danger, him being in prison, all of this is for your benefit. And as God's grace reaches more and more people, there will be great thanksgiving, and God will receive more and more glory. As we witness God changing lives, we'll tell the stories, and God will receive the glory. He goes on, this is why we never give up. Though our bodies are dying, our spirits are being renewed every day. For our present troubles are small and won't last very long, yet they produce for us a glory that vastly outweighs them and will last forever. So we don't look at the troubles we can see now, rather we fix our gaze on things that cannot be seen. We don't focus on the things of this world that are tough, instead we focus on what we can't see now but is waiting for us. For the things we see now will soon be gone. All the struggles of this life are brief compared to eternity, but the things we cannot see will last forever. Whatever it may be that you're facing today, whatever trouble you're up against, Paul says that these things are small and momentary. I know they seem huge, but they're temporary. Paul encourages us to look at what God is doing through it and share what God is doing with others. And that's what this next song is about. When I was lost and all alone, your presence was where I found home. You were there and you're here right now. In every high, in every low, you never left me without hope. You were good and you're good right now. I've witnessed your faithfulness. I've seen you breathe life within, so I will pour out my praise again. You're worthy, God, you're worthy of all of it. Your promises never fail. I've got stories I'll live to tell, so I'll pour out my praise again. You're worthy, God, you're worthy of all of it. And chose the cross, laid down your life to rescue us. The Savior then, the Savior now. But even death was not the end. You conquered hell, so I could resurrecting now. Resurrecting and resurrecting now. I've witnessed your faithfulness. I've seen you breathe life within. So I will pour out my praise again. You're worthy, God, you're worthy of all of it. Your promises never fail. I've got stories I'll live to tell. So I'll pour out my praise again. You're worthy, God, you're worthy of all of it. You're good and I've witnessed it. You're strong and I've witnessed it. You're constant, I've witnessed it. And I'm confident I'll see it again and again. You love and I've witnessed it. You heal and I've witnessed it. You save and I've witnessed it. And I'm confident I'll see it again and again. I've witnessed your faithfulness. I've seen you breathe life within. So I will pour out my praise again. You're worthy, God. You're worthy of all of it. Your promises never fail. I've got stories I'll live to tell. So I will pour out my praise again. You're worthy, God. You're worthy of all of it. To the broken, I'll witness it. To the hurting, I'll witness it. To the lost, I will witness it. And I'll tell them this. I'll tell them what I've witnessed. To my family, I'll witness it. To my city, I'll witness it. To the nations, I'll witness it. And I'll tell them this. I'll tell them what I've witnessed.
Whew. Man, you guys may be seated. There's a lyric in that song. It says, "To the city I'll witness it. To this city I'll witness it." That speaks so much to me. And I hope it speaks to you. You guys have heard us say this multiple times here at Current Church, and we're going to continue saying it over and over, is that we are here for St. Joseph. We are for St. Joseph, whatever that means, and the surrounding communities of St. Joseph in Northwest Missouri. And in fact, if this is your first time here, I want to go ahead and say welcome. Because you know, this service is for you. And if this is your first time here, you can go to new.mycurrent.church and fill out a form, and we'd like to be able to give you something. We'll give you a gift card this week. It'll show up in the mail, and just to say thank you for coming to Current Church. And don't forget, on the way out, as you head out, we'll mug you on the way out. We got a free mug for you. So we'll mug you on the way out there. But listen, we are for St. Joseph. And so much so that, so this next part is very dear to my heart, because just like many of you may be out there, I don't know if this may be your story, you maybe share a same story with me, but what my story is that I came to know Christ and I got saved through a youth ministry whenever I was in high school, when I was in middle school actually, is when I first started going. And it was because a church cared so much about their youth that they had a fleet of buses that they sent in a 50-mile radius all around a real small town in Northwest Missouri. Very small town. And they would bus kids from surrounding farm communities on a Wednesday night, so much so that we had more youth at this youth ministry than population in the town on Wednesday nights. And so last week, we were able to start back up our youth ministry here at Current Church, and that's so near and dear to my heart. And it's continuing tonight at 6 o'clock. And I know, whoa, what are we going to do? Just watch movies? It's kind of what we got on a Sunday night. In fact, no, it's actually going to be at Freedom Church. And so Freedom Church has been so graciously to lend us their building on Sunday nights at 6 o'clock. If you don't know where Freedom Church is, it's on Frederick, and on our Facebook and on our social media, you can find the address. But if you're more of a landmark type of person, it's where the original location of Fun Run used to be on Frederick. So if you know where that is, for those parents that took kids to Fun Run, that's where it's at. So if you have youth, if you know youth, and if you want them to get connected, I'll tell you, if I did not get connected in youth ministry, I don't think I'd be here today. And if you know any youth, I would please be praying for them. Tell them about our youth ministry at 6 o'clock tonight. We'd love to see them there. And more so, that this would not be made possible without you guys also being for St. Joseph. I want to say thank you. And I'll give you an opportunity to give today towards just what we're doing here at Current Church. If you'd like to go to the QR code on the screen or go to give.mycurrent.church, we want to give you that opportunity to give towards what we're doing here. But listen, I want to make this very clear. If this is your first time here, or you're kind of checking us out here at Current Church, we don't want you to give anything. Because that person that's sitting next to you that's been going to church here for a while, they've been giving for you. And that this service is for you. And it's not just for you, it's for your neighbor. It's for the person in the checkout line at Hy-Vee. That's why we're here. We're here for you guys. Hey, we have we're going to continue our message today. We're going to be going what happy couples know. I talked about it earlier. Ben's going to come up here and give you that cliffhanger that he left us with last week. That's right. Kind of like cryptocurrency now. He gave us FOMO last week, right? So if you guys will turn your eyes to the screen here, we got a great video for you before he brings it to us.
Sarah and Davis have chosen to write their own vows. So Sarah.
I promise to care for you and love you our entire life. I promise to be your best friend.
Whoa. You can't just be saying best friend, okay? Pete's my best friend.
Hold up. I thought I was his best friend. We've been through a lot together.
Gosh, we have been through so much together. 2nd grade was really rough for us.
I remember when he fell off the monkey bars.
I mean, he gave me his fruit roll-up.
I gave him my fruit roll-up. That was like...
I hope he knows that he's my best friend.
Our friendship has survived so much. You think that this is gonna divide us?
I promise to be your most loyal friend.
I'm loyal too. She is confusing me so much right now.
She is my wife. He is my best friend.
Who's the best friend here? Who?
As this journey of life completely changes us, we'll be together forever.
Dude.
Aw, he's crying.
I'm gonna have to be gluten-free.
Oh man, dude, you go gluten-free. I have to be gluten-free. And I don't want to be gluten-free, man. It's the end of an era, Davis. It's the end of an era.
Yes, I am crushing these vows.
I would like to object right now, but I want to do it at the right time.
Please don't do it, Pete.
Look,
please.
I'm going to object. My hand's going up. My hand's going up.
Don't.
It's going up. I object.
I told you they just get better and better every single week. It's interesting, the timing on this, this video in particular that we're showing it to you because, and I'm going to share something with you that is way more information about me than you really care to know for most of you. I'm Ben, by the way, if we haven't had a chance to meet before. I'm the lead pastor here, and I'm going to just try and get this, get this out right away and let you know that I have been pretty severely under the weather for about 3 days now. And I'm just going to try and get through this with you all today because I felt like this was important enough for me to give it a shot for you. This is way more about me than you care to know, but I've had some health problems for many years, for about 15 years now, as far as my digestive system is concerned. And we've explored a number of different things over those several years. But over the last year and a half especially, I have been on a major health journey. just having some stuff go on with me and my body that up about a couple months ago caused me and my doctors to start exploring other things that might be, potentially happening there. And I'm pleased to tell you that most of that stuff has come back, nearly all that stuff has come back normal, which is great. But as a result of that, unrelated to the stuff that kind of kicked off the screenings and stuff in the first place, unrelated to that, we discovered that I might be gluten sensitive. And so I am gluten-free for a week and a half now. I'm on a month-long journey to go gluten-free. So that... So I think that video the timing is so hilarious because that's exactly what I'm going through right now in this exact moment. So today we are in part 2 of a series that we started last week called What Happy Couples Know. And what we talked about is the fact that all of us, we come into our relationships, we start dating somebody, we get engaged to somebody, we walk down the aisle to someone, or we wait at the end of an aisle, we say I do to somebody. We enter into all of those relationships, we come into them with a bunch of things of that relationship that we want to be true, that every single one of us, we all have a box, an invisible box of hopes and dreams and desires. Even if you are single in this room today, you still have ideas for what you would like for your relationship to look like someday. We all have thoughts on our relationships regarding things like money, how much of it that we hope to have and how we plan on spending it and using it and maybe budgeting it. And maybe we just think, well, we don't really need money. Love is all that we need, right? Or we come into it with ideas around what kind of a house that we want to live in. Are we gonna rent? Are we gonna own? Are we gonna live in an apartment? Like, we all have ideas around what we want that to look like. Guys, you have ideas around what you hope your wife won't sleep in or will sleep in, right? We come to it with things like we come into our relationships with ideas around how we want to do chores. It's usually based on our family of origin. We have ideas and thoughts around how we're going to resolve conflict with one another, how we're going to work conflict out with each other. We have thoughts and dreams and hopes and ideas around what we want for kids and how creepy our kids might look, as they get older. But the point is, every single one of us, we all have an idea of the future that we want in our marriages and in our relationships. The problem is that future that you want, the future that I want, is all about our hopes and dreams and desires. I said this last week, I'm gonna say it again. At the end of the day, it's my hopes, it's my dreams, it's my desires. Like, I'll tell you this, when I was growing up, I never spent a whole lot of time dreaming about being the perfect person for someone someday, right? I did all my dreaming thinking about the perfect person for me. It was never like, oh man, I can't wait until I become the perfect person for somebody someday. And then when I met Amy and I started dating one another, she thought Ben is the most perfect person on the planet for me. Not really. But we started dating, we got more serious, we got engaged, we came to our wedding, and when we came to our wedding, I brought my box with me, and my wife, Amy, she brought her box with her to our wedding, and everything in my box seemed right to me, and everything in Amy's box seemed right to her. The problem is that what feels like hopes and dreams and desires to us feels like, we talked about this last week, it feels like expectations to them. I mean, from our perspective, we're looking at the box going, this is hopes and dreams and desires. These are things that everybody should want right here, in this box right here. Meanwhile, they're looking at it from their perspective going, no, this is expectations. We talked about the definition of expectations last week. It's this: the strong belief that something will happen or be the case in the future. It's this idea of, okay, we're not quite there yet, but we will get there at some point, won't we? We'll get there someday, won't we? Or we haven't given that up yet, but we will someday, right? Or we haven't accomplished this yet, but we will someday, right? And oftentimes what we're trying to do is we're attempting to either recreate something from our past that we really liked, that we'd like to see in our relationship now, or we're trying to avoid something from our past. That we're like, I don't want that to be my relationship. We're recreating or we're avoiding. We're trying to create our preferred future so that it is like our past or it's different from our past. But either way, whether we're recreating or we're avoiding, our hopes and dreams and desires to us feel like expectations to them. And then when we swap boxes, which is inevitable, Once you get married, you're going to swap boxes. Really, that starts happening when you're dating, when you get engaged. When you swap boxes, you begin to negotiate with one another. You begin to bargain. You might even begin to bribe one another. Like guys, you might say, like, well, if you would just, if you just wear what I'd like for you to wear to bed, then, we'd have less conflict. We'd figure out how to navigate conflict less often and better. If you would just figure out how to budget your money a little bit better, then we could afford the car that we want, or we could afford that house that we want. And with time, this is what we talked about last week, kind of where we left off last week. With time, our relationship becomes a debt-debtor relationship. Well, you owe me, I owe you. That's what you're supposed to do in our relationship. That's what I'm supposed to do in our relationship. That's what a husband does. That's what a wife does. That's what men are supposed to do. That's what women are supposed to do. I mean, that's what my dad did. That's what my mom did. But when we're in a debt-debtor relationship with one another, in our relationships with our spouses, we can't give and we can't receive love because we can't see it as love. Here's what I mean by that. Here's an example. If you owe me money, you can't give me money, right? You can't give me something as a gift and I wouldn't receive it as a gift. I would be receiving the money from you as a payment. For example, if you owed me more than $100 and you approached me one day and said, Ben, I really, out of the generosity and kindness of my heart, I want to give you this $100 gift. I would think that is not a gift, and where is the rest, right? Right? Because as long as we are in a debt-debtor relationship, as long as we owe each other something, we can't see that as a gift of love. We can't receive it as a gift of love, and we certainly can't extend it as a gift of love to one another. So the question is, how do we prevent that from happening? How do we prevent all of that from happening? How do we keep our hopes and dreams and desires from becoming expectations that we put on the other person? And the answer is that we answer this next question that I'm going to ask you the same way that happy couples answer this question. And the question is this: well, what does he owe me? What does she owe me? And happy couples know that the answer to that question is they owe me nothing. We owe one another everything, but I'm owed nothing in return. We owe one another everything, but I am owed nothing in return. This is what a Christian marriage is really all about. A Christian marriage, a Jesus-following marriage, is not based on some sort of Christian rules of behavior. Great marriages, great relationships are not built on rules. They're not built on certain sets of behaviors. They're not built on, you need to act right. You need to do this thing right. Like, it's not based on roles. It's not based on exchanging. Like, if you do this, I'll do that. It's not based on that. It's not based on being even. Well, as long as we're even, as long as you're doing your part and I'm doing mine. Great relationships and Christian marriages especially, Jesus-following marriages especially, are a submission competition. It's a race to the back of the line. Rather than keeping score with one another, rather than trying to compete with one another, rather than like bargaining with one another or just trying to stay even with one another. It's recognizing, well, she does not owe me anything, but I owe her everything. He does not owe me anything, but I owe him everything. And today what I'd like to do is I'd like to explain where that idea comes from. So Jesus, on the night that he was ultimately going to be betrayed and arrested, eventually he was going to be beaten and killed for us. On that night before, he was with all of his followers. He's with his disciples, and he's sharing with them some very important things. And then he says to them, listen, guys, I'm going to give you a new command. Now, here's the thing. Jesus saying a new command I'm giving you would have been a very offensive thing for Jesus to say. Like, we kind of miss the importance of this because we know who Jesus was, but they should have been thinking in that moment when Jesus said, a new command I give you, they should have thought, hold up, Jesus. Commands can only come from God. God is the only one that can provide commands. And by the way, he's already provided all of them. He did that hundreds of years ago through Moses. Jesus, you can explain the commands. You can prioritize the commands. You can share your insights into those commands. You can read them in the synagogue. That's great. But you can't make a new command, Jesus. That's not how this works. The disciples, when Jesus said, a new command I give you, they should have gotten up and left. That's what they should have done in that moment. But they were already thinking to themselves, okay, this night's been a little weird. Like Jesus has already been doing some, like saying some weird things. He did some weird things, and like we're not really tracking with him. And like he's been doing some things over the last several years that are making it very obvious that we got to hang on to what it is that he's saying. But at the same time, they should have been nervous in that moment, because just a few moments earlier, like they were there that night to celebrate a holiday. Just a few moments earlier, Jesus had made that holiday all about himself. But they stick it out. They're like, all right, Jesus, we're going to stick it out with you. This is what he says: a new command I give you. Love one another. To which the disciples were probably thinking, that's not new. Like, you've been teaching that for a while now. And Jesus is probably thinking, well, I'm not through. He said, I want you to love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. And in this moment, Jesus, who had already, over the last several years, he'd already reduced all the Jewish laws, more than 600 of them, he'd reduced them down to 2. Love God, love people. And now in this moment, he's reducing them down to 1. He's like, all of life, all of your relationships, all of your interactions boil down to this: you are to treat other people the way I have treated you. And he could have went around that room in that moment, pointed to each of them. He could have been like, hey, Matthew, you remember what things were like whenever I met you? You remember that? Yeah, Jesus, I remember. Yeah, remember everybody hated you. Your own people hated you. The Roman people that you were collecting taxes for, they hated you. Like, do you remember what I did? When everybody else hated you, what did I do? You invited me to follow you, Jesus. That's right. And I went to your home, and I went with all of your friends, and we spent time with all of your tax collecting friends, and I loved them as well, right? Yep, you did, Jesus. It was pretty awesome. Hey, Nathaniel, you remember what I did whenever I met you? Actually, Nathaniel, you remember what you said whenever I met you? Nathaniel's like, yeah, Jesus, I remember. I was like, what good could possibly come from Nazareth? Right, that's exactly what you said, Nathaniel. You insulted me, you insulted my family, you insulted my grandparents, you insulted my friends. What did I do? You invited me to follow you. That's right. I loved you. Oh, and by the way, I've been loving you for the last several years, and I'm not done, because tomorrow I'm about to be beaten, I'm going to be crucified, and I'm going to give up my life for you, to the point where down the road, you're going to go around telling everybody, hey, Jesus gave up his life for us, and now he's asking us to do the same for other people. This is what we call the law of Christ. It's no longer just the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do to you. Nope, Jesus takes it a step further. He's like, I want you to do unto others as I have done unto you. Let me put it this way: if you're never sure what to say or do, if you're not sure what to say or do, love like God through Christ loved you. Imagine if we treated our relationships like our marriages in this way all the time. Not sure what to say or do? Love like God through Christ loved you. It means we're supposed to go, hey, how did God treat me? How did God treat me when I messed up? How did God treat me when I lied to him and lied to other people? How did God treat me when I didn't put him first or put somebody else before me? How did God treat me? It's very interesting if you follow the New Testament after the resurrection. Every single New Testament piece of direction, every single piece of guidance that is given to us after the resurrection by the authors of the New Testament, every single one of them are based on this command from Jesus: as I have loved you, so you are to love one another. In fact, the Apostle Paul, who was a guy, you may not know this, but the Apostle Paul, he comes to us, he shows up on the scene as a guy that hated Christians. He couldn't stand Christians, so much so that he would hunt them down and kill them just for being Jesus followers. Couldn't stand them. And then he has an encounter with Jesus that completely changes his life. He becomes a Jesus follower himself, and he begins writing letters to people. And he begins applying this command of Jesus in these letters that he's writing mostly to Gentile people, non-Jewish people. And he's applying it to all relationships. He applies this command of Jesus, as I have loved you. He applies it to all relationships, including marriage. Again, every piece of guidance from Paul is linked specifically to this command from Jesus: as I have loved you, so you are to love one another. In fact, in one letter in particular, he applies this command of Jesus specifically to marriage. And so we're going to look at it together. This is what Paul says: wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. I think he nailed it. Let's pray. Listen, hey, I recognize that for some of us in our culture, this statement right here, it kind of bothers some of us. And if it does bother you today, I'm kind of glad that it does. In fact, for some of you, if you've struggled with the church, maybe you've walked away, or maybe you've considered or doubted your faith or questioned your faith or whatever, maybe this verse for some of you is one of those sticking points for you. But if it does bother you, I'm glad that you're here today. I'm glad that you're watching online. I'm glad that you're listening to this, because I want to talk about this a little bit. Now, here's how this comes to us. The New Testament was mostly written in Greek. It was translated into English for us in our English Bibles. It was originally translated from Greek into English. And if you go and find some of the oldest manuscripts in the original Greek, and you were to translate those manuscripts literally, like word for word, into the English, this is how this verse would actually read. Wives, to your own husbands, as to the Lord. Which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Why? Because there is no verb. The word submit is not actually there. Now, before I explain to you why the word submit is not actually there, or we're going to talk about that, where the verb actually comes from in our English translations today, I want to say this first. We tend to read this command from Paul, and we tend to think, something along the lines of, huh? Like that seems odd, huh? But to the first century audience that Paul was writing this to, when they heard Paul say this, or when they read this letter, their response in that moment would have been, duh, not huh. Because in that culture at that time, wives had no choice but to submit to their husbands. This was not even a big deal to them. In fact, it wasn't a surprise that Paul would say this, and they certainly did not get offended that Paul would say, wives, you need to submit to your husbands. Because in Greek culture, Roman culture, even to some degree in Jewish culture, the men of these cultures, they had this thing that gave them legal jurisdiction over their children. And it gave them legal jurisdiction over their wives. Their kids and their wives belonged to them. So when Paul says, wives, submit to his audience, they're thinking, well, duh. Because if not, I could be sold into slavery. I could be traded to somebody else. I could be arrested for whatever he wants to accuse me of. Again, this was not a big deal to them, but it is a big deal to us. And the reason that it's a big deal to us is really what comes later, which we're going to look at in just a second. So back to the original question, why is there no verb in the oldest Greek when Paul says, wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord? The verb submit actually comes to us from the verse before. In fact, one of the popular things in Greek literature was this. They would use a verb in a little passage of scripture or in something they were writing, and then that verb would be inferred in everything that came after that. The verb would be inferred in the verse to follow. So the word submit is actually inferred into this verse because of the verse before it. So the question is, what is the verse before this verse? Well, the answer to that question is it's a game changer. Before Paul said, wives, submit to your husbands, he says something else that sets the tone for this entire passage that he wrote. This is what he said, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Again, every single time Paul gives us a directive, every single time he gives us some guidance that we should follow, he points it to Jesus. Not to the Old Testament, not to the Ten Commandments. He points it to Jesus. As God through Christ did for you, you should do the same in your relationships. You should do the same in your marriages. In other words, submission, according to this, and guys, this is especially important for us to maybe hear today, submission is mutual. I love this word reverence here in this verse. You may not know what the word reverence is kind of meaning or implying here, but reverence means to be in awe of all that Jesus did. In awe of all that Jesus has done for you. He's forgiven you of your sins. And all of that, you don't just go to church and be in awe of God at church. You don't just sing songs during worship and be in awe of God during that time. You don't just read the Bible because you're in awe of Christ and what he did for you. Your awe, your reverence for what Christ did for you should become and should lead you to love for other people. So in a Christian marriage, in a Jesus-following marriage, the command from Paul is mutual submission. This right here is what makes marriage amazing. This is what makes relationships amazing. This is what happy couples know. That I am here for you. You are not here for me. And I'm not here for you because you're here for me. I'm here for you because God was here for me. And I'm going to use all of me in order to benefit you. I mean, yes, I recognize we're each going to have our unique roles. We're each going to have, like, we each have our gift. We each have our talents. We each have the things that we kind of have to be responsible for. And those things are going to be a little bit different between the two of us. But at the end of the day, you and I have the exact same value. And that value is found in Jesus. So what Paul does here is actually very interesting. Paul wants to explain something to his culture, or to the people he was writing to, that was going to be very countercultural for them. And so in order to explain something countercultural to them, he actually begins with the common culture. So he begins with, wives, submit to yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. Now before we move on, I just want to take note for just a second. Some of you women in the room, you might be thinking to yourself, well, what if my husband is not worth submitting to? Well, I did a little studying. I did a little research. It didn't take me very long. But do you know the number of men that are not worth submitting to? 100%. Every single one of us at some point are imperfect. Every single one of us are growing. Every single one of us are learning. 100% of us at some point will have moments where we are not worth submitting to. Back to Paul. Paul says, wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. So Paul's like, listen, women. He's addressing women first. Women, I want you to place your man's hopes and dreams and desires ahead of your own. Not because he expects it from you, but because your heavenly Father requests it from you. And then what came next, the thing that Paul says next, is what would have caused, think about this, it would have caused his audience at that time to respond the way that we do when we read this verse, wives, submit yourselves to your husband. Because again, to their culture, this was just assumed. But what came next was different. What came next was new. In fact, what comes next is why what came first is so offensive to us today. This is what Paul says to men. Husbands, love your wives. To which we go, duh. Like, of course. Like, that's what we're supposed to do. But to the culture, the people that he was writing to at this time, they didn't have any obligation. Those men had no obligation to their women. They would have thought, she is obligated to me. It's not the other way around. And today, when we read this, we stop at this word love, and we get offended. We're like, so wives have to submit, but husbands just have to love? Well, Paul's not done. Husbands, love your wives. Just as Christ, there it is again, he's pointing to Jesus again, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Again, Paul, he's writing this to a church, to Christians in Ephesus. They knew the story. They had heard the story of Jesus. They knew exactly how things ended for Jesus. They would have thought, okay, wives submitting to their husbands, that makes sense to us. But now you're indicating that we're supposed to both submit to one another. You're indicating that we're equal. We're on like level playing fields. You're indicating that I have to submit myself to my wife, even possibly unto death for her. Paul goes on in this same way. Husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. It's like, okay, if you can't get past the Jesus part, if you can't get past the giving up yourself for your wife, if you can't get past that part, think of it this way. Love your wife as if she's you, because he who loves his wife loves himself. You've probably heard this term at some point, that when we get married, we become one flesh. We become one person. There's no division between the two of us. Now, this is a common line of thinking for us today. We hear it at weddings and we talk about it in the church, but this was new thinking for them at this time. For them to think that men and women were on equal ground. This was new thinking. So when they heard, hey, submit to one another, they kind of would have had the same response, like I just don't know how I feel about that we have today to this idea of wives submit to your husbands. But do you know who introduced the idea in a real way that really actually changed culture? Do you know who introduced the idea of men and women being equal first? It's Jesus. Jesus was the one that was constantly arguing for the value of women and the dignity of women and the worth of women, even when it went against the culture that he was a part of. In fact, one day Jesus was teaching, and as he's teaching, the religious leaders, they show up and they're gonna try and trick him, they're gonna try and trip him up. They did this all the time, but this time in particular, they show up to him and they're like, hey, Jesus, can a man divorce his wife for any reason? Because at that time in their culture, what they believed was that a man could divorce his wife for any reason whatsoever. All he had to do was say, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you 3 times, she's gone. All good, moving on. Oh, you burned dinner today? I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you, see you later. Forgot to pick up the kids? Same thing. Sneezed on me in my sleep? You're out of here. I thought that was funny when I was working on it this week, but I'm tired of her. Out of here. So they come to Jesus. They're like, hey, Jesus, can a man divorce his wife for any reason, or is there a specific list of reasons that a man can divorce his wife? And Jesus is like, there's no reason. There's no reason for you to get divorced. He's like, men, you think that you are better than her, but you're not. Jesus is like, listen, you are equal. You have become one flesh. You are to treat her like you would treat yourself. I think this is part of the reason why women loved the ministry of Jesus. It's why women flocked to his ministry. They supported. We're told that there were women that supported the ministry of Jesus financially. One of the really cool things, and this is neat as we think about Easter coming up here in a month, women were the first to see Jesus alive, resurrected after the crucifixion. Do you know why that's a big deal? Because in that time, in that culture, the word of a woman, the testimony of a woman was worthless. It didn't mean anything. A woman could go to court and give her testimony on something and it wouldn't affect the case one bit because the testimony of a woman meant nothing. And yet the Gospels tell us that women were the first to see Jesus alive and the first to tell other people that Jesus was alive. I mean, to me, that means that the resurrection of Jesus, it has to be true. Because the gospel writers, as they were writing this, if they wanted to make up this story to get people to believe it, they certainly would not have started with women being the first to see Jesus alive, because nobody would have believed their testimony. So this idea in our culture today that we experience this more here in the United States than they did then, but the idea of men and women being equal, that concept, is a reflection of the teachings of Jesus and Paul on women. So back to what Paul said. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Jesus is like, I gave up my life for you. I gave up my life for the church. So men in the room, let me ask you this question. What is life to you? What is life to you? Is it success? Is it money? Is it like a sense of pride in who you are and what you do? Is it entertainment? Is it sports? Is it just life just being fun? Is life to you sex? Like what is life to you, men? Put her before that. But you can't put her before that as long as you are coming into your relationship with a box of expectations that you're expecting from her. Women, I'll ask you the same question. What is life to you? What's life to you? Because whatever it is, whatever is in this box for you, you can't love, you can't submit We can't mutually submit to one another as long as we have boxes of expectations for one another. So women, whatever life is to you, put him before that. Because this is what happy couples know. That we have to get rid of our box of expectations. We have to be for the other person. So the question is, how do we get everything back into our hopes and dreams and desires box? How do we get it back into this is just hopes and dreams and desires. It's not expectations that I have for you. How do we get it back in there? And then once we do that, once we get it back in there, what do we do? Well, for starters, like we talked about last week, we recognize he does not owe me anything, but I owe him everything. She does not owe me anything, but I owe her everything. But in order for that to work, and I realize that this is a little frustrating, it has to be mutual. Why? Because as Paul says, we are to submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. This right here, this is oneness. His best over your best. Her best over your best. Now, last week, I asked you the question. I asked you to go home and think about this. I asked you to go home and think, what is in your box of hopes and dreams and desires? What's in the box? Somebody told me I should have pulled in that clip from last week. So last week I asked you the question, what's in your box of hopes and dreams and desires? And are you expecting somebody to carry that box for you? To answer the question, have I accidentally, maybe even purposefully, handed my box off to somebody else and expected them to fulfill my hopes and dreams and desires? Now this week, I want you to ask them, what's in your box? I want you to ask the other person in your relationship, what's in your box? You don't have to rush it. You can find a good time to really talk it out. For some of us to ask this question, it's scary for us to think about what they might respond. But I want you to ask them, what is in your box? And then the next thing that I want you to do after you ask them that question is shut up. Guys, I'm telling you, if you ask your wife, what's in your box of hope and dreams and desires, you might knock her socks off. Heck, she might be upset about the fact that you've never asked her what's in that box of hopes and dreams and desires before. You might have been married for 20 plus years dealing out of only your box. Women, if you ask your man, what is in your box of hopes and dreams and desires? He's going to say, nothing. And here's the thing. He's not lying. Like it's not that there's nothing in there. It's just that he truly doesn't know what's in that box. And yet he's expecting you to fulfill these expectations. And he may not even know what his hopes and dreams and desires are. Guys, this is why I told you last week that you need to be thinking about what's in your box of hopes and dreams and desires. Because most of us guys, we're scared to talk about it. But guys, the reason that we need to talk about it is because we're scared to talk about it, and yet we're expecting her to fulfill all the things in this box, and yet we've never told her what they even are. So asking that question of one another, what's in your box, indicates, hey, I am more interested in what is in your box than I am in what is in mine. I am so into this relationship that I just want to know your hopes and dreams and desires. Now, I would venture to guess that after talking about this over the last week, and talking about it again today, I know that for somebody in this room, and maybe for multiple somebodies in this room, you're probably thinking to yourself, well, what about fill in the blank? What about their hope or dream or desire for fill in the blank? What about that? I mean, if I take the pressure off of them, when it comes to my thing, if I take the pressure off of them, I'm afraid. If I take the pressure off of him, you have no idea what he'll do. If I take the pressure off of her, you have no idea how much she'll spend. If I took the pressure off of him, he may never come home from work ever again. She may never follow through ever again. I get that. If I take the pressure off, I'm afraid of what might happen. But here's the thing. If all your relationship is, throughout your relationship, is just more and more of a tug of war arguing over your own hopes and dreams and desires and their hopes and dreams and desires, if all your relationship is just a pull back and forth and back and forth, if the idea, the concept of taking your end of the rope and laying it down, if that idea terrifies you, if you're worried that like letting go of your end of the rope, might pull you into their box of hopes and dreams and desires, here's what you need to know. There's no hope till you let go of the rope. The fighting's just going to keep continuing. And if you are a Jesus follower, if you're trying to follow Jesus, your job is to go first. Why? Because when you were dead in your sin, when you were far from God, God, through Jesus, dropped the rope. He did something for you even if you never do anything in response to what he did for you. And Paul's like, listen, out of reverence for that, what God did for you, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. At the cross, God went first. And so Jesus followers, we go first. Here's what happy couples know. Happy couples put each other first by going first in an effort to be last. Happy couples go first by dropping their end of the rope first in an effort to be last. So the challenge for you this week is this. Make every effort this week to drop your end of the rope. Find out what's in their box of hopes and dreams and desires. Take notes on what's in their box, and then take action on the notes that you take. Now, I realize you might be asking the question, okay, that's great, Ben, but like, what about my hopes? What about my dreams? What about my desires? I mean, these are important things. These are things that God placed in my heart that I'd like to see these come true too. What about my hopes? What about my dreams? What about my desires? Well, we're going to talk about that next week. So don't miss part 3 next week of what happy couples know. Will you pray with me? God, thank you. Just out of awe and reverence for you, I just want to say thank you for what it is that you did for us. You went first in putting yourself last. And so out of reverence for that, out of awe for that, out of appreciation and gratitude for that, I pray that you would help us, those that are in this room, those that are watching online, those that are listening online this week, I pray that you would help all of us to figure out how to drop our end of the rope, how to stop fighting over our hopes and our dreams and our desires, and to put you and to put the other person first in our relationships. Pray that this week it would just constantly come up in our minds. How can I put him first? How can I put her first in this situation and in every situation that we come to in our relationship? We love you, Jesus. We pray it on your name. Amen. Hey, thank you guys for joining us today. Just a reminder, as Ryan said, we got student ministry tonight at Freedom Church, 6 p.m. It's the 6th through 12th grade. We'd love to have your student there or have you there if you're a student. So you guys have a great week. We'll see you back here next week for part 3 of What Happy Couples Know.